these supplies are truly necessary. And it was one that moms and families asked for all the time. One last thing I will say is that some of our moms came in with a list of things to leave the hospital with before discharge, and it had the supplies. So just a funny story, but ways that we as supply chain leaders think of to critically ensure our patients are well cared for.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we're going to speak with Randy Subramany, Director of Procurement at NewYork-Presbyterian. This is going to be very, very interesting for you folks today. We've got some unique and critical medical supplies or devices that have some uncommon and unique logistical considerations that we're going to dive into today. I'm not even going to put it out there, but I can tell you that the first one we're going to talk about is a living, breathing organism used in the delivery of patient care. And so it doesn't get much more unique than that. Stay with us. I'm not spoiling the surprise. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with Randy after a short break.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
All right, joining me now, Randy Subramany, Director of Procurement at NewYork-Presbyterian. And Randy, I've been excited for this one. We've been making a little bit of a move towards really digging, maybe a better way to say it is flying a little bit lower to the ground. And what is going to be so excellent about this interview is we've got three very uncommon supplies with unique logistical considerations that we're going to be talking about today. And so I'm really excited because I think this one's going to be fun, Randy. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, Justin, excited to talk about all things supply chain with a hospital focus and really dive into three unique things. I bet if you asked your listeners to take a piece of paper out and jot down three unique things a hospital purchases, I bet you no one will get all three. So I'm building it up big because I know for a fact it's going to be a unique discussion. But no, Justin, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So one of the things I want to point out too is that you've been listening to the show. And so sometimes we reach out to people and they come on and it's their first experience, but you've been listening to a number of episodes already. So I want to thank you for being a listener of the show. And I got to ask you, do you have a favorite episode? Not to put you on the spot, but are any that stand out to you so far?
Ooh, that's a great question. I can't think of one that stands out because the content itself, out of respect to all the wonderful supply chain leaders, I'll leave it at a general that everything I've heard has been interesting. And, I've tried to do my homework to bring my A game tonight. So I'll leave it open-ended for you, just a little mystery. We can talk offline privately.
I'm going to go the other way and say that this one's my favorite because my favorite's always the one I'm doing right now.
I love it. Love it.
All right. So why do you love your supply chain career? Like, what is really driving your passion for what you do every day?
So, Justin, I think it boils down to just two or three key principles. I think first, it's understanding and recognizing that every supply that's used in a hospital, whether it's starting with a Band-Aids, gauze, your traditional PPE, or whether it's your more complicated surgical mesh, pacemakers, products used with surgical robots for spine cases, all plays a part in patient care. And I use the lens of if I myself was receiving care or I had a relative who needed care, I would want to do everything within my power to ensure that that person and that clinician had what's needed to care for that human being. So in the end, I think the first is passion for caring for human beings. That's what anchors me and that's what drives me as a supply chain professional. The second, I would say, is it's so dang complicated. I mean, I know we're going to talk about 3 unique supplies, but sometimes I'm just amazed. On a daily basis, we have, just for the listeners to paint a picture, I work for an academic medical center all throughout the New York City area. And we have just about 10 to 15,000 unique supplies entering our hospitals. And we're relatively standardized, to be candid, but entering every day. The complexity of those logistics, whether it's supplies via a distributor, whether it's coming in via a third-party carrier, I love the challenge of it. And I love the high-stakes game that a supply chain leader like myself that we have to deal with every day. So I think those principles of caring for humans while trying to make complicated situations less complicated is really what wakes me up happy every day.
Well, I'll tell you, being a clinician myself, I can only imagine that first point is really important because you're obviously trying to help deliver the best possible care at the best possible value, and aligning yourself with caring for the patients is a great way to endear yourself to the clinicians that you're supporting. The complexity piece, that will also come into play because if you can deliver, especially under duress, that also wins you a lot of points with clinicians, and it can help you do things that are really transformative, I think, in your supply chain when you are able to foster those relationships. There's been a number of episodes kind of talking about that or alluding to it, on a constant basis for, I think, really obvious reasons. But then that complexity piece ties very much into our conversation today because the areas that we're going to be focusing on do present some complex challenges. And so I'm going to give the 3 categories. I know you got a couple of examples that we're going to walk through in each of the categories, but just to set the table for the audience, the first category we're going to be talking about is burn supplies. The second one, we're going to go to L&D or labor and delivery in the NICU. And then cochlear implants. So for those of you who may have watched the recent season of The Bachelor, you'll be familiar with one of the final 2 women that were the available bachelorettes. One of them actually had cochlear implants. So I feel like this is something that's becoming a lot more mainstream as well. You're seeing a lot more folks out there with cochlear implants as that technology just continues to advance. So really excited to talk about that. Let's start with burn supplies. I'll let you sort of talk about a couple of these and tell me what is so challenging in this category.
Sure. So I think I'll set the table, Justin, by addressing the challenge. What's challenging is these are caring for a burn patient. It's relatively unpredictable. Like in a way, you can forecast if you're working on the business side, you can forecast on a given basis or every year how many people you expect to have like certain orthopedic procedures, elective cases, relatively predictable. For burns, there's different, speaking as not a burn expert, but with some lens of understanding, there's different types of burns. And you can't really forecast when someone's going to come in with a particular type of burn. So you have to be ready at all times for all forms of care. So let's dive into, I think I've outlined 3 and I'll spend most of the time on 1. The first supply on my list, and I think people cue the drum roll, is leeches. So in our burn area, and leeches is called herudotherapy. So leeches themselves provide, so I'll go into a basic overview and then I'll go into what makes the logistics somewhat complicated and some anecdotes to illustrate the point. But I think in a burn area or a burn unit, leeches provide wound healing. So they secrete substances with antibacterial properties that break down blood clots and facilitate the draining of excess fluids from a wound site. So chances are most burn patients come in with some form of wound due to the burn, and it needs healing. And literally, and I'll get into the logistics, you have doctors, you have nurses who are picking leeches out of a saline solution, which is how they arrive, and placing them on the wounds of a patient. Other benefits of the herudotherapy: one, leeches can help to drive or prevent blood clotting disorders. They help to, therefore, promote blood flow. For a lot of our burn patients, they tend to have microsurgeries or need some form of tissue repair. And with that tissue repair, leeches are used to help reattach and reconstruct tissue, which is going to sound weird, but that's one of the functions, and helping to, again, pair with or helping to promote blood flow helps to create that healing. And I think the last is around pain relief, Justin. So, I mean, some key things, I'm going to get into logistics, but I can sense a question coming from you that I would love to answer.
Well, I'm thinking about, you painted this picture of leeches being in a saline bag. And I'm thinking, like, how long can they live in saline? It's not glucose, so they're not being fed fuel. So I got to think they can only last so long.
Yeah. So just to go through some of the procurement and logistics. So we order leeches just like we would order any other product. A PO gets cut to our vendor. It arrives the next day in a box marked live leeches in here. So you clearly know what's in there. And Justin, the best analogy I can think of is imagine going to a pet store and buying a goldfish. You walk out with a goldfish in a bag. That's how the leeches arrive. They arrive in a saline solution, and every 24 hours, you have to change the solution. So in essence, you need to find a container of some sort. Could be, a standard plastic container that you then would deposit the leeches. You have to change them immediately upon arrival. So you deposit a saline solution, or you pour saline solution, you transfer the leeches, and every 24 hours, you're in a way farming. You're maintaining leeches that are being used to care for patients, and upon execution of a treatment, the leeches are disposed of.
How many come in a bag? Solution. How many are like in a part? That just depends on your order.
Yeah, it's a custom order. I mean, most clinicians.
Is your unit of measure per leech?
It's each. Yes, it's an each. I think it's approximately it's a low dollar figure. It's less than $5 per each. But no, we tend to order. You can order 12. You can order 40. In this world, it's truly customizable. What I will say is most physicians tend to apply in intervals of 12 to 24, just based on the size of the patient. And I think that's like the magic number, again, based on the type of burn. But no, that's the maintenance of leeches. I mean, what I will say, what makes it unique is that most hospitals, and I'll give an anecdote in a minute, but most hospitals tend to have leeches within their pharmacy purview, where the pharmacy teams have wells, per se, for a lack of better term, that they are keeping leeches in, and every 24 hours, they're changing the saline solution. So, I mean, to illustrate some of the complexity, Justin, I painted the ideal world where a physician tells you, hey, Randy, we have this unique burn patient. We need to care for this patient. Can your team facilitate an order for leeches? Very straightforward, easy to plan. But let's just pretend, traditionally most orders to our vendors have to be placed by 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let's pretend it's 5 p.m. and I have an urgent message from one of our doctors that, hey, a burn patient has arrived. We need leeches care. We have to solve for that. And the complexity is it's not as though I can place an order to get it next day. We've passed that cutoff. From there, and again, living in New York City and working for a New York-Presbyterian, what do? We walk over to Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is a nearby cancer institution, and we facilitate a transaction to pick up leeches from them, which is as glorious as Randy in his polo and khakis heading into the pharmacy department at Memorial Sloan Kettering and having a container filled with leeches and walking it back to our burn unit to care for our patients. So I think part of what I alluded to, this principle of challenge, this is one of the key challenges. It's off hours. It's when staffing generally in a hospital is leaner than usual. it's something as supply chain professionals we have to be ready for at all times. So
it makes me think of like those emergency cases, those add-ons that happen with a car wreck. And I'm assuming the burns happen in that same scenario as well. There might be orthopedic needs, but there could definitely be burn treatment needs for obvious reasons. I also think something you touched on is, the logistics in an urban versus a rural setting could be heavily impacted too, right? Because you're in a tight knit area with lots of, healthcare systems that are nearby, like you described, just walking, over to the pharmacy next door. But if you're in a rural setting, you've got to solve for that complex equation and with a completely different strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's pros and cons to both. In an urban area, one of the things we struggle with is just congestion in transportation. So a lot of times for unique needs, maybe like you've outlined trauma cases as a common example, but, we rely on moving supplies from point A to point B. If it's in the dead of rush hour, that's 2 to 3 hours that you don't have that it takes for supplies to arrive at the hospital. But you're absolutely right. There's certainly pros and cons, benefits and risk associated with supply chains. But again, it's that challenge that keeps me going. It's my responsibility to help figure this out for this burn patient who needs the care. So yeah, Leeches is number one.
I love the Leeches conversation. And it's actually what I think inspired this interview topic. When you and I sat down, we were just talking about how important education and awareness, not just for healthcare supply chain, but for the other departments, just understanding the complexity of the flow of supply chain. So I love highlighting that one. Let's go to labor and delivery. Pick one or two out of labor and delivery that continue on this theme about, hey, folks, many people that are listening are supply chain professionals. They understand that it's a complex world, but let's keep digging into these nuances.
Yeah, sure. So as I'm sure all of our listeners can imagine, if your significant other and you are leaving a hospital with your newborn baby, you want to leave well stocked. You want to have, especially for first-time parents, you have no idea what the heck you're doing. I'm speaking as a first-time parent. You want to leave with your formula. You want to leave with your Pampers or your diapers. The mom wants to leave with the appropriate feminine care products, and it could be a slew of other things. So one of the areas we noticed some challenges with on our supply chain was post-discharge. And some discharges occur at noon, some discharges occur at 8 p.m. We were running aggressively low on our bread and butter supplies. Like, you can't run out of infant formula unless it's a recall. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, right.
So one of the things we thought there was a supply chain professional is that as part of the patient experience, most families want to go home as soon as possible, healthy, but as soon as possible with their newborns. So could we make life easier, Justin, for our nursing team, where instead of our nurse rounding up 7 to 12 unique supplies, grabbing bundles and just walking back with them, could we create a discharge pack that contains all of those supplies? Again, formula, Pampers, chucks or underpads, maternity pads, supplies like that upon discharge, in essence, the nurse in question, Nurse Justin, would see family A and provide them with the pack and say, here you go. Have a wonderful time with your newborn. It expedites the discharge. It gives that family everything that's needed in one cohesive pack. And one thing we've noticed is that, or a few things we've noticed is one, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but it's a correlation. We've seen an increase in our patient experience scores, especially around this question of, have you been set up for success? I'm paraphrasing, set up for success upon discharge. And second, we've noticed we have some internal ways of measuring increased engagement with our clinical partners who feel as though they have the supplies needed, not just to care for their patients, but to ensure the patients are successful post-discharge. So, and again, if anyone wants to get in the granular weeds of this, we partner with Cardinal Health, but there are several main custom pack providers to go through with a fine-tooth comb. You'd be so surprised, Justin, how many opinions exist on all of the supplies that need to be in a discharge pack. We started with 27. And then we worked critically with a lot of our obstetric leaders, a lot of our nursing partners, some social workers as well, to narrow down to the what was absolutely needed. And we got to, I think, 12 supplies in the pack. And then that requires working with the distributor. They build up inventory. It gets ordered and delivered every day to our hospital. But it was a complicated, I don't want to make it more complicated than Leeches, but it's one that was complicated in that these supplies are truly necessary. And it was one that moms and families asked for all the time. One last thing I will say is that some of our moms came in with a list of things to leave the hospital with before discharge, and it had the supplies. So just a funny story, but ways that we as supply chain leaders think of to critically ensure our patients are well cared for.
Yeah, I was just thinking through that. Like, you're right. You're going to be very picky about the different types of supplies and what you choose. I mean, I'm sure brand even came into that. Like, oh, I think these are really a lot better than this. I think it's awesome that you've connected it to like those HCAP scores, but also just think about it going home, not knowing if you have everything you need. You're a first time parents. You talked about having that experience recently. I mean, you're bound to forget something, and the stress and the anxiety. And then, what if baby comes early and you didn't have a chance to prepare and then you rushed off to the hospital? What an excellent way to just set people up for success heading home with their newborn. And I can imagine how difficult it was to really get those custom packs developed, but I can see lots of applications for custom packs like that. So great job there. All right. So let's go to cochlear implants. I have to be honest, the Leeches, that's what you drew me in with, but you and I did not talk about cochlear implants when we set up for the interview. So this one, really, really intriguing. I obviously kind of outed myself. I don't watch The Bachelor regularly, but my girlfriend got me into that particular season. So I outed myself as at least a recent Bachelor watcher. But the cochlear implants I just find fascinating also because my mom ran a speech and hearing center. So when these first came into market, my mom was, running a center. She was the director, that was really doing a lot of the speech therapy post-surgically. So I'm wondering if this, all kind of ties together even a little bit with like discharge, et cetera, and success from a logistics perspective. So walk me through cochlear implants.
Yes. And Justin, it's the logistics that are going to be interesting about this one. But I'll start by saying, this is a non-judgmental zone. We respect everyone who watches The Bachelor and Bachelorette. I may have indulged in a season or two of Bachelor Randy. In Paradise, but that's neither here nor there. But so let's talk about cochlear implants. So there's really two categories of how the implants are thought of. There's the internal implants, and then there's the external implants. So the internal implants are basically, it's two components. It's an electrode array and a receiver or stimulator, as it's termed, the electrode array gets implanted near the cochlea, part of the ear, or within the inner ear. And then the receiver or stimulator gets implanted right behind the ear. And those are the internal implants. So if you come in for a cochlear implant procedure, that's part one. It's the internal implant. You then leave. About 3 to 4 weeks later, you return, now depending on the hospital, but based on what I'm about to describe, a secondary location to have your external devices activated. So there's 4 main components of an external device. That's the speech processor. That's a processor that, as we're talking, it kind of translates and creates the signals in your ear to understand what someone's saying. You have a transmitting coil, you have a microphone, and you have other processors and accessories that all contribute to this external activation. So Justin, here is where it gets interesting for us as a supply chain professional. So again, internal implant done, let's just pretend on April 3rd. External activation, let's just pretend April 25th. The external devices are activated at a secondary location. So here's what makes it tricky to explain New York-Presbyterian in a nutshell. So we have our hospitals, we have our physician practices that are led by the universities, separate legal entities. So we have a Cornell practice, we have a Columbia practice. I work for New York-Presbyterian while Cornell. The external devices get shipped to our college partners who have a different ERP, who have a different receiving process, who don't have clear ways of knowing this is coming. And in essence, it requires I don't want to make this more burdensome than it really is, but it requires complex logistics where we have to plan with the physician, with the receiving clerk at this office. And again, these offices,
You're talking about some hand holding though, right?
Oh,
like
yes,
some
absolutely.
real like manual intervention on the communication aspects of logistics.
Absolutely. And most logistics, things are automated and streamlined in those ways. No, this is an email or a phone call to another entity. And to paint the urban setting, these offices where these external devices are activated, it's not as though that location is purely for the medical center. Like they have a receiving dock that's receiving packages for non-healthcare clients. So to them, and I don't want to minimize someone's thought process. It's simply just a shipping box that wherever it's marked for delivery, I have to go towards. But then on our end, it's like, okay, how does that person know to?
But how do you know how do you know it's been received?
Exactly right. And then how do we validate that receiving in our ERP process as well? So it's a layer where, trust me, you hear of all the buzzwords coming out of 2020 with supply chain about being resilient, automating things, utilizing artificial intelligence to drive change. All well and good. But I will tell you fundamentally, and this is why I really picked on cochlear implants, in a complicated structure where the external device, again, is activated at a different legal entity than the one where the devices were implanted, it can become complicated. And there's only so much you as a supply chain professional can control. So candidly, we just have this manual process where phone calls are made, emails are sent, screenshots of FedEx tracking numbers and information is sent to my receiving team so we can receive and ensure our vendors get paid so we don't go on credit hole and they remain sustainable. To be candid, we conduct about 15 to 20 of these procedures a month. So it's not as though, I'm not saying the volume is robust. It's not an orthopedic case where you could have so many different implants. But there's a level of tediousness that we as supply chain professionals have to get right. Because again, we exist in this ecosystem of we have to care for our patients. We have to also ensure that we're doing right by our providers and our suppliers. So in this case, Cochlear Americas needs to get paid, and their supplies, and our supplies need to get received properly, and controls need to be followed. So, Justin, a little bit of an exposure into the world of cochlear implants.
So let me ask you about the ERPs, just so that I'm clear, because I realize you're saying, they're different legal entities, right? So is it that they're on a different ERP platform and or that they're just set up because they're a different customer to the ERP?
It's a combination of both. So different ERPs. And then to your point, and for your listeners, your non-supply chain listeners, I'm sure there's many of them, most suppliers or vendors really don't ship anywhere. They really ship to organizations they have like a ship to that they can validate that this organization has a tax ID. It's a true legal entity. So we had to come up with this antiquated way of doing things with how the quote has to have the accurate information. But no, to answer your question, it's a combination of both. It's different ERPs. So it's not as though, receiving clerk Justin can type in PO 9945677 and then receive on our behalf. Completely different. But then setting things up properly in our vendor system to ensure it's shipped properly, even to the right dang location, proved very complicated at first. And at the end, Justin, one thing I'll say to close out at least my part of this comment is, at the end, if these external devices don't get what they need, it really does, for lack of a better term, it really sucks. Because then you'll have a human being there waiting, anticipating that, today I'm getting this device activated and I can finally have a better ability to hear. And it comes really bad down to that raw focus on patient care. We have to get some of the complicated AI stuff correct, but we also have to get this simple, basic, pick up the phone, send an email, communication correct as well. So.
Yeah, that's so crazy how much manual effort has to go in there. It's almost like you need a third-party integrator to pull those ERPs together, because they might be using the same ERP provider. It's just set up as a separate ERP for all the privacy reasons and everything else. But you'd almost think it could almost be like some sort of third-party integrator to connect the dots, between the two systems somehow, or at least send an automated email. But specifically, I think you highlighted what's most important here. That day, when the patient goes in to have it activated, this is the day that they might hear well for the very first time. So I'm imagining there's anxiety, there's excitement. And for that to just be like, hey, sorry, it didn't work out. We're going to reschedule your appointment. And keep in mind, what was it, like a 3-week time period? Is that what you said? Between when the internal device is implanted and then to when the external device is then attached and activated. They're already waiting and kind of going through a recovery for 3 weeks. And they're only experiencing the downside of surgery, right? The pain, right? The recovery, the healing part. Like, this is the cake at the end of the meal, right? Like, this is what makes it all worth it. For that to kind of, fall flat is definitely an impact on the patient experience, no doubt. So I think that highlights it really, really well, Randy. All right. As we wrap up the conversation today, first thing I want to say is I really appreciate the level of granularity and detail, for today's discussion on these 3 different areas. Also, if anybody is listening to the podcast, definitely look for our LinkedIn post. I'd love to hear some more uncommon supplies with unique logistical challenges from the listening audience, or maybe even, this challenge that you have around cochlear implants. Maybe somebody out there has, tackled it a little bit differently. Would love to hear those kinds of ideas. And Randy, anything that you would like to add, here at the tail end of what I consider to be a phenomenal interview? You did a great job.
Yeah, no, thanks, Justin. It's been fun talking about these types of supplies, and, looking ahead, I'm just going to casually invite myself back in 2025 for a part 2 discussion where we can talk about tissue and other. I was going to get into some more wound care dressings that are the primary ingredient is honey. But You know what? I think it's sometimes best to keep the audience waiting. The waiting game in the supply chain world. We don't like waiting in the supply chain world, to be very, very clear. We need it right now and we need it right now and in the right quantity and all those R words. But no, just I think I'll end my portion by saying supply chain is complicated, especially in the healthcare environment. It's a high stakes game. It's one that we have to get right. But I dare to say for all supply chain professionals, there is this underlying, and clinicians in general, just with a different lens, or anyone who works in a hospital with a different lens. But for us, it really comes down to ensuring that patient has what's needed, but also that our clinical teams have what's needed to be successful. And it's really with these uncommon supplies that more often than not, for example, you're going to get you're going to get other wound care supplies and PPE correct. Because you think about a hospital, big space, so many different units. Chances are one unit doesn't have, you can just borrow from another and provide it. Relatively straightforward customer service. But someone's like, hey, my leeches didn't arrive, or hey, my external devices from Colorado, so not even local, didn't arrive. That's where we have to get it right. So it's what drives me in the morning. And no one dreams about being a supply chain extraordinaire. Not that I'm using that term to describe myself. But I think no one dreams or has childhood memories of, I wish I can go into the world of supply chain management. But what I will say is that common or uncommon, getting those darn logistics is extremely important.
Absolutely. This was great. I got some ideas for you too. We're going to talk about it after the interview. Randy Subramany, everybody, Director of Procurement at NewYork-Presbyterian. A phenomenal interview today. All right, Randy Subramany, everybody, Director of Procurement at NewYork-Presbyterian. What a fun interview. Really kind of, turning over a few stones and looking at some really complex logistics concerns with some uncommon supplies like leeches, I would say labor and delivery discharge packs, maybe not as uncommon, but definitely complex, trying to put together those custom packs and get all of the clinicians on board with what supplies are going to be going in there. And then one that really fascinates me, cochlear implants. It's amazing that we still, in this day and age of technology, just due to how we're all on different ERPs and that transfer of information, that there requires such a manual effort to coordinate what is happening in the acute setting, which is the implantation of the internal device, with what then is going to happen in like an MOB or a medical office building, when they're going to turn on the external device and activate that. Really, really interesting discussion today. I could see a spin-off series in the works on power supply. Randy, phenomenal job today. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate everybody for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.